Bryan Kohberger. I will never forget that name. Today is the day Bryan Kohberger is set to be arraigned, which sounds technical. It's not. It's the defendant in a felony charge. You don't normally get arraigned on lesser charges, but definitely arraignment in a felony charge where you are formally read your charges in open court with a court reporter taking it all down. So there's no confusion that you know with what you are charged. And this comes from rights under our Constitution in olden days, thousands of years ago. Let's just take, we get our jurisprudence, our common law from Great Britain. And there were times, and in other countries to this day, you can be thrown in jail on an arrest and languish there for years, literally. You don't know exactly what you're charged with. You don't know when or if you're ever going to go to trial. Not so here. Under our Constitution and case law that interprets the Constitution, you have a right to be arraigned, formally read the charges lodged against you. And that's what's happening with Kohberger. Now, he will either plead guilty. That's not going to happen because he's looking at a potential death penalty. Why sign up for that? He's going to put the state to the test and try to beat the charge. He can plead guilty, not guilty, the likely scenario. He may have his lawyer enter the plea for him if he doesn't want to speak in court, which could be wise because some people may recognize his voice. Although there's plenty on social media of him talking, of him speaking. Or if neither of them, Kohberger or his lawyer, will enter a plea formally, the law, of course that's happened before, so there's been case law on it, so there is precedent. In other words, preceding law addressing this issue. The precedent is that if the lawyer or the defendant will not enter a plea on the record, the court, the judge, will enter the plea for them, and the law presumes they intend to enter a not guilty plea. Those are the three choices with the technical letter of the law. However, a lot more is going to happen in this courtroom. Victims' families are going to be there. We don't know if Kohberger will have an outburst, if he'll say something. I'll never forget O.J. Simpson, may he rot in hell, saying 100% not guilty. Did he say 100% or did he say 110%? What did he say? What were the choices? Was he 80% not guilty? 10% not guilty? Anyway, everybody remembers that. This is following a grand jury indictment. And when you hear the words secret grand jury, like, ooh, that's scary. It's not. All grand juries are secret. In other words, it's just the grand jurors. Usually there's between 20 and 40 of them, depending on the size of the jurisdiction. They're typically taken from the voter pool or the driver's license pool. And in inner city Atlanta, we would have 2 grand jury days a week. I think it was Tuesday and Thursday. It would be all day long. And you can present a case to the grand jury in about 2 minutes. One witness saying, oh, I was standing on the corner. I saw this dope transaction. I got the dope. This is the guy that did it. And then the grand jury would vote. It's not a finding of guilt or innocence. It's very simply, is there enough evidence for this to go to a jury, for a jury to decide guilt or innocence, or if a crime was committed? That's all it is. Prior to the grand jury indictment on Kohberger for 4 counts of murder and burglary, it was believed that a preliminary hearing would be held, which was a horrible idea, which I said on day one, because that subjects the state's witnesses to cross-examination long before trial. Why subject them to cross-examination twice? And why give the defense your entire playbook? Why give them your witnesses on the stand under oath? It's crazy talk. Anyway, they came to their senses and had a grand jury. But that's not even what I want to talk about right now, because something very significant has occurred. It's as if a monster has reared its ugly head. With me, Chris McDonough, director of the Cold Case Foundation, which in itself is impressive. But what I find most impressive is the fact that McDonough is a former homicide detective with about 300 homicides investigated to his credit. He's the host of YouTube channel The Interview Room, and you can find him at coldcasefoundation.org. Chris McDonough. In the last days, it has emerged that in the months leading up to the murders of 4 beautiful University of Idaho students, this perv, and I don't think I'm going out on a limb saying that, manipulated a female colleague into asking him, Bryan Kohberger, of all people, to install video surveillance in her apartment. And he did, the big hero. And Chris McDonough, we believe, according to these allegations, that he broke into the woman's apartment, her home, moved things around, and scared her. And she goes to work the next day, where he was at WSU, Washington State University, getting his PhD and a teaching assistant. She tells him, oh my stars, somebody has been in my apartment. There's no doubt in my mind. This was moved, that was in the wrong place, blah, blah, blah. We don't know exactly what was moved. It could have been a chair, it could have been a sofa, it could have been an ashtray, it could have been a trophy or a picture. I mean, I have this particular picture right beside my bed, 2 pictures. One is of the twins in their strollers, their double stroller, taken when they were babies on a street in New York. The other one is down at my church, my Methodist church in Macon, where I grew up, with my mother, my father, my husband, and the twins. That's beside my bed. Now, if I suddenly saw one of those in the kitchen, I would know something was amiss. So, from what the allegations are, Chris McDonough, the woman comes home and she goes, what? As he predicted, she came to work and told him about it, where he, the hero, the savior, offers to install security cams. You take it from there, McDonough. I can't wait to hear this. Hit me.
You know, Nancy, what a fascinating, delve into the potentially criminal mind here. And the individuals, obviously, that, we have all associated with in your career, my career.
How can you be so calm? What is wrong with you, man? This woman has a killer stalking her and getting in her apartment and installing her security camera. This is right. Yeah. He's obviously progressing. It's a step in the progression up to murders. She's lucky to be alive, man.
Yeah, no, I'm tracking you 1,000%. And where I'm going here is this is really the pace that he was going at, the way I'm projecting him here. Okay? He is, to your point, he's the savior. He comes into this situation with this, technical background, and he moves things around. If this is him that broke into the apartment, the first part, okay, and, which it sounds like it is. And he is playing this mind game with her, but more this fear game. This guy is projecting this fear, i.e. control, by moving these items around. And who does she come to? She comes right to him and says, hey, I've gotten blah, blah, blah. These things are moving, blah, I need help. And he steps in and says, hey, I've got the solution for you. You need to have a surveillance system. Now, let's take that also back to the incident in March for a second, where the neighbor of the victims at 1122 King, who all of a sudden goes out to her car and there's this big question of where was Bryan Kohberger? Well, nobody knows, but we do know, and I understand from January through June, he was kind of MIA because everything was online. So that piece of this puzzle in March, we have to think about this car incident where she goes to her suitcases and discovers those have been rearranged. And now we have this other incident of items being rearranged. Is there a correlation there? From an investigative aspect, those are the exact types of things we start looking at. And then we discover in that car incident, if it's connected, her underwear is in the door frame of the cup holder. And when this thing is first going down, the cops are going, well, we got a lot of Kohbergers going on around in this area, et cetera, but there's no real correlation. Now this information comes out, and guess what? It's almost the same type of behavior.
Okay, let's,
go ahead.
In a nutshell, tell me what events you would connect.
I would connect, at this point, there's a high probability the car incident is connected.
Okay, when you're saying the car incident, I'm going to make a flow chart.
Yeah.
Which car incident are you, to which car incident are you referring?
The neighbors who came out to her car in March and discovered her suitcase had been removed out of her car and her underwear had been taken out of her suitcase and put into the door frame into a cup holder in her passenger door. Okay?
And you're connecting this to Kohberger because?
Well, it would be consistent with this fantasy.
What about location?
Right next door to where the victims live. You can see, you go from her house right to the victim's house in her backyard.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's just too close for comfort.
So you would conceivably connect that plus?
Well, and now we've got the voyeurism situation, and now we take that
the colleague
into the the colleague, and now we take this 12 pings in the neighborhood, and we think to ourselves, okay, and Greg Cooper and I talked about this, by the way. As you know, Greg ran the behavior science unit. We've been colleagues since 1998. And behind the scenes, we've been just talking about, okay, Greg, what's your thought process on this? And he's point blank comes right out and says, it wouldn't surprise me that he did a recon into this residence. And I agree with him that there's a high probability he was poking around that house. Now, is that a physical recon or is it a surveillance recon? Well, we know that there's indications that he definitely was on the surveillance side, based on the fact that his phone is going to ping. But we don't know if he had access into their Wi-Fi into that house. And
well,
if he
hold on.
did,
I want to just conjure up an image for you. So, and they should be able to figure this out from movements with his cell phone.
Yes.
But we know that he set up the colleague's Wi-Fi for her, including the surveillance system in the home. So he had her passwords. He knew how to look, break into her Wi-Fi. Like when I'm on the road, even from a plane, I can log into the Wi-Fi at the house. And if I want to look at the nanny cam, I can. Usually I see the dog walking around, so it's not as helpful as you might think. But that said, I wonder how many times he would drive by her home to just get straight into her Wi-Fi. I wonder if he could log into it remote. Can you just see him hunched over his computer watching this woman? Probably just laying on her sofa reading or watching TV or something. And totally, I don't know how to put this delicately, but let's just say watching her normal behavior, like in the kitchen, maybe walking around in her underwear or PJs for sexual purposes?
Yep. That's all part of the buildup. And there are devices out there, Nancy, that are available on the marketplace. They're called Sniffers. Okay? And what that device does is it captures all of the open networks within a geographic region. Okay. And so as a result of that, if with his technology background, for him to go and set up a camera system and get into it, that is a behavior that is somewhat, very diabolical and planning, ahead.
Hey, there's
right?
another aspect to this, but I'm just a trial lawyer. I think we need to shrink on this. But the planning. I mean, who has time? Like, if somebody said, listen, I want you to break into your neighbor's place and move their stuff around just enough to make them realize somebody's been in there, then sneak out undetected, and then somehow manipulate them into asking you to set up their security camera, and then setting it up so all of this so you can watch them, change clothes, go to the bathroom, really? Cook dinner? You watch them while they watch TV? What does this guy do all the time?
Well, and then apply for a position at the police department to teach the cops
about people like himself.
Exactly.
I mean, but the time and the machinations required for him to pull this off, and this woman should be thanking her lucky stars, down on her knees to heaven, that she was not his murder victim. How many times do you think he logged in to watch her, I don't know, vacuuming, doing whatever she normally does, studying? She was his colleague at school.
Yes, and this is why, we need to tell your audience and others, get one of those covers over your laptop camera, over your desktop camera, because the capability of somebody getting into your system and watching you is very real. And not only the fact that, that, and we're just talking about those types of devices, but here he's actually, installing the devices. And so he's just taken this to another level to where, okay, I can see her 24/7. Now, remember, all of that is about possession for him. Okay? Now, and the docs can talk about that all day long. But from an investigative aspect, it's all about, okay, I'm controlling her, and she has no idea I'm controlling her. And that's why, Nancy, remember when you went back to behind that house?
Yes.
What was the first impression you had when you saw the layout of how simple it was?
Honestly, I felt almost sick to my stomach, because I don't know if you remember, we went behind the house. It was in the evening at night, and there were some lights on inside the house. I think one light was left on. You could see straight in from the dark on the outside into the home. And I could imagine Kohberger sitting there in the back, and there was a perfect place. There was where you could park your car and sit there and look straight in. I guess it was their top floor rooms. And I could just see him sitting there. And do you see the comparison of sitting outside the four murder victims' place looking in to the girls' apartments, and him hunched over his computer at home watching this colleague whose security cams, whose wireless he had installed? It's the same MO, the same modus operandi, method of operation. And you brought up something I find also probative, the incident where the neighbor had her suitcase removed from her car, her underwear taken out, and stuffed in the door of the car. I think it would be well worth investigators' time to canvass the area. I know they've already canvassed the area in regards to what did you see the night of the murders, but have any of them had any other unusual activity happening to them around the time of the murders, like this neighbor, where your car's broken into, where your home's broken into, just anything that could lead us to the progression of his behavior, going from 0 to 100 mph in a matter of months.
Yeah, that progression that you're talking about, right, is he is living this fantasy, because remember, everything that happens potentially with these guys is fantasy based if it's, has an undertone of, a sexual assault type of challenge. And so everything, the buildup to get to this point, and then ultimately the rage, okay, is what we're seeing. We call that pre-incident behavior.
Right.
Right, from a criminal behavior analysis aspect. So he is building, and he's looking for his victimology in relationship to, okay, what's my type? Okay, well, I don't like this one, I don't like that one. How do they react?
I'm glad you said that, because just if you look at a lot of Ted Bundy, just for example, victims, they have physical similarities. Many of them were slight Caucasian females with dark hair parted in the middle, at least shoulder length hair. I would be curious if this female colleague that he was spying on allegedly physically resembled any of the murder victims. And if they want to prove this case against him regarding the surveillance cameras, LA law enforcement could ping his phone or his nav equipment and determine whether he was outside of her home around the times that we know he was surveilling her. And wouldn't his computers show, wouldn't there be a digital footprint of when he logged into her security cam at home?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can assure you that digital treasure trove will be front and center in this trial.
I bet he could even do it from his cell phone.
Absolutely. And I know he can.
Yeah.
I mean, meaning I've been involved in enough cases, I've seen it. And there's going to be it's not going to surprise me one bit when the FBI testifies at some point, and I'm sure they already testified in the grand jury, when they come to the stand and the public hears, hey, we have A, B, C, and D, which brings us back to the house. Remember, Nancy, his apartment. When the defense went over there, what was the first thing they grabbed?
Smart TV.
The TV, exactly.
And what do you read into that, Chris McDonough? I'm really interested in your theory.
Well, I read into it that it was important enough to tell his defense investigators, probably through his attorney, can you guys go pick up my TV at the house? Now, we can hope that obviously, and I'm sure they did, they stuck a stick into it and downloaded everything into that, stick. And that's sitting at the lab right now being processed.
But what do you anticipate being gleaned from the smart TV?
Well, maybe that's his window into hell, i.e. the girl's apartment that he set up the surveillance cameras on.
Mm-hmm.
So this is his, maybe that's the device that he, it was the biggest thing in the room. So for him, it's like, I've got to be part of this. I got to get into that room. So it's much more exciting for these types of personalities to use a big screen TV versus a laptop. Because remember, they want to be there. They want to be a part of it.
So you could conceive a scenario where he's just sitting at home like, having dinner with her surveillance cam up on the big screen.
Total control. As Dr. Picotto says, he is controlling them without their realization.
The same way he manipulated the female colleague into asking him for her help. Him for his help.
Exactly.
And how do you interpret that, McDonough?
Well, the Superman of that, right? He's the helper, as we would call him, the helper. Okay? I.e., oh, you have a problem. Okay, Ted Bundy, remember, he was the helper. Hey, can you help me, move this, over here, and then he'd hit you on the head with his fake cast. Okay, well, it's the same, situation for him. He's just not that sophisticated yet. He was still moving through this learning phase of how to really, perfect his skill set here. And what did he lean on? He leaned on the skill set that he had the most control over in his mind, i.e. his technical ability. So his helping is he's utilizing that as a skill set to lower the risk level of the victim, and which lowers his risk level as the suspect. And this is why, when we think about that, nobody ever thinks about, does the suspect think through his risk? You and I talked about it, and when we both went up there, the first thing that struck you, I remember you saying it, many times, holy cow, there's only one way in and one way out of this thing. And so that risk level that he calculated was to his advantage, and it's the same thing here. He's lowering her risk, i.e. in her mind, by his helping install a device that should lower that risk. But it doesn't. It actually elevates it.
And I think it
So
also
for him,
elevated his desire. It's like feeding the monster. He's spying on this woman, and it only exacerbates his desire to take another step, a step further into criminality. And all this while, Chris McDonough, he is interviewing and sending questionnaires to violent felons so he can hear their details about the violent crimes, rape, murder, child molestation. So he can hear the gruesome details of their criminal behavior, whipping him up into a frenzy.
What a great point, Nancy. I mean, and think about what you just said, even deeper, right, in terms of what he would be thinking. Everything in the questionnaire that you just mentioned lowered his risk. Everything. What did you feel like after the crime? How did you mitigate that? Those questions that he asked, to your point, which is a brilliant point, by the way, and just think, but if we think about putting ourselves as one of the things that we always tried to do as investigators was to look through the lens in order to understand why a hunter selects a deer. You have to look through the lens of the hunter. And then in a victimology, what we call victimology, you have to recognize what were the weaknesses the hunter saw within that deer that allowed him to pull that trigger.
Or maybe it's just a matter of the deer that happened to be the deer that ran across his scope.
Yes, but did he put out corn to attract that deer?
I see
and
what
so
you're saying.
is this camera incident the corn? And he decided, you know what, this isn't my deer. I need to find others.
And
so
also, he probably knew enough from his studies in crime to not be related or connected to his victims. So a colleague wouldn't work because they would obviously come looking for him. See what I mean?
Point. It's a great point.
We wait as the arraignment goes down, and I can't help but wonder, Chris McDonough. We know about the accusations that he was spying on this woman digitally, this colleague of his. What more will we learn about Bryan Kohberger? Goodbye, friend. Guys, thank you for watching Crime Online with Nancy Grace here on YouTube. To get the very latest, subscribe to Crime Online here